On one side of photography in the 1970s, you had the new topographic photographers whose work was growing in popularity and was one of the dominating influences in art photography of that period. But another kind of photography was starting to emerge. It blossomed in the 1980s and took root in the 1990s. The title of this talk, Fabricated to be Photographed, I chose from several. Could have used other terms that have been used to describe this kind of work: constructed imagery, the arranged image, tabletop photography. Photo writer and critic A.D. Coleman called it the directorial mode, referencing the photographer like a director in a film who works in front of the lens as well as behind it. I chose Fabricated to be Photographed because I think it's perhaps the best title of this kind of work, photographers who built things specifically to be photographed. It's also a nod to Van Daren Koch, one of my instructors who became the curator of photography at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art and put together an exhibition of this style of work under that same name. There was still a number of influences on artists in the 1970s. You still had the reach of Dada and their intentionally absurd connections. Conceptual art was strong in the 1970s. While there were a number of new artists that came out during that period, many still looked at Marcel Duchamp as a leading figure in that arena. His idea of the ready-mades was influential on the Beckers, the German serial artists who also were part of the new topographics group. Surrealism, and we see that of other photographers at the time. You see it in Duane Michael's photographs. You see it in Jerry Ullsman as well. Performance art was gaining ground in the United States at this period of time. Couple performance artists here, Karen Finley and Chris Burden. Most of their works we know from photo and video documentation. The group we're going to look at today are mostly university-trained artists. There's a couple other photographers I could have included here. Andre Serrano, who we looked at in the Dark Side lecture. He's the one that did Piss Christ. And Cindy Sherman's an important postmodernist, and I'll talk about her work in our next lecture. Robert Cumming was born in Massachusetts. He's a sculptor, a photographer, and painter. He's best known for his constructed photographs, whose layered meanings reference both science and art history. He often worked early in his career in diptychs and triptychs, and you see that image here. And you can read the title, Amputee Roughs Out War Book, supposedly drawing with his teeth. That's Robert Cumming himself. He's not an amputee. A lot of his work deals with illusion. You see that in two explanations for a split pond. At the top you have one explanation, at the bottom you have another explanation. In the top, pail seems to have fallen over and spilled water onto the ground, forming these two little puddles, the pond. On the bottom, you can see that the pail itself has been split, and that's a second explanation. Well, if you look carefully in his photographs, what looks like water and ponds is most likely not that at all. It's a mirror, partially buried, reflecting the skylight so that it appears as a reflection. But one of the things that you'll learn is you can never completely trust the truth in Robert Cumming's photographs. In fact, he often shows us the means of his illusions. You see that in two views of a major spill. What you're seeing in these photographs apparently is a chair in the process of being tipped over. It had a bucket on it, and obviously whatever contents the bucket had would spill out. But he's carefully included things in the foreground stakes and string and tape and things like that he used to construct the scene. He also shows us that he's carefully lighting the scene, but he also has stakes on the outside that if you look really carefully, you can see the wire that he's used to hold these things up. You see it a little bit in both photographs. So he shares the illusion with us. He earned a BFA in 1965 from Massachusetts College of Art in Boston and an MFA in 1967 at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He often works in these diptychs. This is another one, Fast and Slow Rain, and you can see the slow rain just dripping straight down from the heavens, or the fast rain being blown by the wind. Well, again, if you look carefully, you'll see that that's string that's painted so that it looks like rain, creating the illusion in the photograph. But the illusion's even more successful. I've seen this photograph for many years. I've been showing it for many years, and one of the things I always assumed is that that's just a normal size house and stuff in the background. I saw a show a decade or so ago that included both the objects and setups that he photographed as well as the photographs. That house in the background, it's a tiny little homemade dollhouse. There's humor in his work as well, and hopefully you see this one as humorous. In 1970, Cumming moved to Southern California to teach photography, and in 1974, he started teaching at the University of California, Los Angeles. Lisa Socio wrote, Robert Cumming's photographic work is only one component of his production as a conceptual artist. His photographs are characterized by cerebral concepts that are nonetheless materially incorporated in oddly useful constructions. His interest in perceptual glitches, magic tricks, paradoxes, and puns recall the whimsy irony of Marcel Duchamp and of his contemporaries, Robert Heineken and William Wegman. Cumming explores the relationship between text and images and employs visual and linguistic humor in an ongoing investigation of everyday objects according to an objective sensibility. He has applied his often satirical and sometimes absurd engineering to fantasy machines and landscapes. His slightly romantic appreciation of industrial-era mechanics is part of a long-standing interest in technology and its relationship to society and perception. This piece, you can see, he's theoretically left a note to himself. Remind me to shoot Ansel Adams' Raisin Bread before the end of August, Bob. So he's leaving himself a note. A photo note, which could have simply been written on the print, and often he did those kinds of things. After years of looking, I finally found a copy of Ansel Adams' Raisin Bread on the internet. Unfortunately, it's a horrible slide, but it's the only copy that I could find. Like many of his work, Ansel Adams' Raisin Bread's a diptych, from start to finish, from left to right. It's hard to see in this image, but basically we have a box of raisins, we have a loaf of white bread, a couple of pieces of white bread are put out on the table, and then we have a bunch of raisins. And from start to finish, what you see in the finished is someone has simply taken some of the raisins and pressed them into the white bread, making Ansel Adams' Raisin Bread. Essentially critiquing Ansel Adams in that his work had become so expected and conservative that was the equivalent of the photographic white bread, and turning that into raisin bread was taking the easy way out. He received 3 National Endowment for the Arts grants and a Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship. He has had solo exhibitions at the Whitney Museum of Art in New York, the Hirshhorn Museum in Washington, D.C., and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. His most recent monograph, The Difficulties of Nonsense, was exhibited in 2018 at the George Eastman House in Rochester. Here you can see one of his 20 by 24 inch Polaroid pieces. constructing something specifically for the lens. And that decisive moment, if you will, that was recreated in the explanations for a major spill is recreated in this sculptural piece from 1982. William Wegman has a BFA in painting from Massachusetts College of Art in 1965 and an MFA also in painting from the University of Illinois Champaign in 1967. From 1968 to 1970, he taught at the University of Wisconsin. In the fall of 1970, he moved to Southern California, where he taught for a year at California State University, Long Beach. By the early 1970s, Wegman's work was being exhibited in both museums and galleries internationally. While in Long Beach, Wegman got a dog, Man Ray, with whom he had a long collaboration. Man Ray was known in the art world and beyond for his endearing deadpan presence and became a central figure in Wegman's photographs as well as his videos. In 1982, Man Ray died and was named Man of the Year by the Village Voice in New York. It was not until 1986 that Wegman got a new dog, Fay Ray, and another collaboration began. Fay had a litter of puppies in 1989, so Wegman's cast of characters grew to include her offspring. I first encountered Wegman's work as a video artist. He did these strange, short videos. I have a few of them to show you.
Oh, Mom? Mom? I think Randy's going to be sick. P-A-R-K was spelled correctly. And that was good. Wait a minute. And you spelled O-U-T right. But when it came to beach, you spelled it B-E-E-C-H, which is like the, there's a gum called beech nut gum. But the correct spelling is, we meant beach like the sand. So it should have been like the ocean. B-A-C-H. See, that's the difference. Well, okay, I forgive you. But remember it next time. Okay, stay there.
I've met Wegman a couple of times. I can't say that I really know him. I remember one of the interesting things that he said is that he originally had no intention of including Man Ray in his photographs or his videos. But while he was working in the studio, the new puppy he had would whine and cry until it became the center of attention. When he included the puppy in his videos, the puppy was happy. And so that was the start of their relationship. This video is a little longer. I'm going to skip it in this presentation, but I've included the URL. I suggest you watch it. This is one of the first pieces of his that I saw. I believe it aired on The Tonight Show. This is a short one.
Faye is going to climb over the box. She did it.
I trust you get that humor is part of what William Wegman does. His work has been a popular success. It's appeared in books, advertisements, films, as well as television programs like Saturday Night Live and Sesame Street. Little did I realize until just a couple years ago, and I was showing these, that students started telling me that they had seen these before. I'm too old to have grown up with Sesame Street, but many of my students did grow up with it, so you may have seen William Wegman pieces before.
To market. To market, to buy a fat pig. Gotta buy a pig, gotta get a pig. Chickadee chick, big fat pig. Do you have any pig? I'll see. No pig. Home again, chickadee chick. Bye-bye. Order more pig. To market, to buy a fat hog. Gotta have a hog today, jiggity jog. Do you have hog? I don't think so. How about a nice pear? No, I gotta have a hog. Home again. Jiggity jog. Bye-bye. Order more hog. To market, to buy a plum bun. I'm in the mood for a plum bun. Gotta get a plum bun. Do you have plum bun? No bun. What? No plum bun? We have a plum. Home again. Market is done. No pig, no hog, no bun. Wait a minute. What's this? Is this one? This tastes like plum.
Coming out of Wegman's dog photographs were a number of book projects. Many of these were directed towards popular entertainment and popular audiences. He had his dogs act out Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, the ABCs, Mother Goose, Farm Days, My Town, Surprise Party, and Chip Wants a Dog. He's also published a number of photography books, including Man's Best Friend, Fashion Photographs, and William Wegman 20 by 24, which alludes to the 20 by 24 inch Polaroid. This is one example. In 2006, Wegman's work was featured in a retrospective at the Brooklyn Museum, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Norton Museum of Art, and the Wexner Center for the Arts, as well as the Addison Gallery of American Art. The exhibition, entitled William Wegman, Funny Strange, explored 40 years of his work in a variety of media. This is an image that pokes fun at fashion photography, as does this. John Pfahl studied art at Syracuse University. He received a BFA in 1961 and an MA from the School of Communications in 1968. He's both a celebrated artist and an important educator. This is one of his most famous pieces, the Triangle, Bermuda. I met him a couple of times. Sadly, he died just recently. He was one of the victims of COVID-19, although I understood he had other serious health issues. Talking to him, he swears he made this photograph in Bermuda, the play on words in more ways than one. Pfahl taught photography for over a decade at Rochester Institute of Technology and was a longtime adjunct professor in the Visual Studies Department at the University of Buffalo. This would have been the Visual Studies Workshop. In 2009, he was honored as Educator of the Year by the Society for Photographic Education. His Altered Landscapes was published in 1981. You can see what he's done in this image is gone out, set the camera on the tripod, and then from that one-point perspective, gone out and wrapped part of the trees with aluminum foil. So it's reflecting light, but it's also lining up perfectly with the horizon and the seascape. He makes illusions from the one-point perspective of the camera to create these sometimes humorous juxtapositions. Pfahl's work involves the creation of images that combine the conceptual as well as the perceptual. They play with the idea of the picture plane. The photograph is two-dimensional, yet it displays three-dimensional space. In a case like this, if he was working with a view camera, which I believe that he did, you can actually draw on the ground glass of the back of the camera an image. That then he could go out or have assistants go out. So likely what this is a series of string or tape or other materials like that he's actually placing alongside the rock and lining it up in such a way that it seems to be the square laid inside the frame, so a frame within a frame. It's talking about framing photographs, but it's also talking about the illusion that photography is. If you looked at this as an installation from any other perspective, it would not look like a rectangle. But from the one-point perspective where the camera is, it does. Same kind of technique here, going out in the scene and essentially drawing with tape and other kinds of materials. He wrote, "I want to make pictures that work on a more mysterious level." Add to that a level of humor as well, as you see the bagel pile or his Big Dipper in candles. Some of his work is parodies, as his Moonrise over Pie Pan, which is a parody of the famous Ansel Adams photograph Moonrise over Hernandez, New Mexico. He received 2 National Endowment for the Arts Photographer Fellowships. Monographs on his work include The Altered Landscapes, Picture Windows, A Distanced Land, and Permutations on the Picturesque. This is also a parody. As you can see in one level, what he's doing is putting lace out in the foreground, and it has the texture and the look of the surf in the background. But it's also a parody of an Ansel Adams sequence. Sandy Skoglund studied art and art history at Smith College in Massachusetts from 1964 to 1968. She went to graduate school at the University of Iowa, receiving her MA in 1971 and her MFA in painting in 1972. She moved to New York in 1972 and started working as a conceptual artist. In the late 1970s, her desire to document her conceptual ideas photographically led her to teach herself the medium. Her photographic technique became fused with her interest in popular culture and commercial picture-making strategies. In 1981, Revenge of the Goldfish, which you just saw, and Radioactive Cats appeared at the Whitney Biennial. What she's doing in these photographs is she's building the room, she's building the sites. The cats are probably paper mache or clay. They're all made by her and painted. The furniture is probably thrift store furniture, which she has painted and made to look the way that it is. For the photographs, she will hire models. So often she's photographed them with real people. Although in the installation of her shows, she sometimes shows the photographs as well as the installations that she builds. When she does that, she substitutes mannequins for the real models. Sandy Skoglund produces surrealist photographs by constructing intricate tableaus. She colors the set and places the life-size objects and subjects. This process for a single piece takes her sometimes months to finish. When she is done staging the scene, she photographs it, documenting it before moving on to another theme. She is currently Professor of Art, Multimedia Installation, and Photography at Rutgers University in New Jersey. An art critic commented that Skoglund's photographs are criticism littered with interpretations of all kind, whether feminism, sociological, psychological or whatever. But Skoglund herself claims not to be aware of these readings, saying, "What is the meaning of my art? For me, it's really in doing it." David Levinthal created his first Toy Story in 1972 as a Yale graduate student working with his classmate and friend, Doonesbury cartoonist Gregory Crewdson. While the Vietnam War was being played out nightly on the TV, the two created a fake photo documentary of the Germans' 1941 invasion of Russia. They set up little plastic army men, photographed them close up, and played out this war scenario. It was eventually published as a book titled Hitler Moves East. In making these, Levinthal would go to any lengths, Crewdson says, quote, including setting fire to his living room rug, end of quote. When a professor asked him, "Why don't you take pictures of reality?" Levinthal answered, "These toys are my reality." Miriam Horn in the U.S. News and World Report in 1997 said that they were, quote, dark stirrings in Toyland. Levinthal's pictures allude to our national myths. They at times are discomforting, so much so that the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, which exhibited the controversial photographs of Robert Mapplethorpe, canceled a show of his recent work. Levinthal's earlier series of the Wild West and post-war sexual innocence revealed the artifice of cherished American myths. Some of his latest pictures go further, revisiting through toys the Holocaust, sexual violence, and the work the Institute of Contemporary Art refused, colored cookie jars that once ornamented yards and kitchens across America. The last work hit a raw cultural nerve. Some critics questioned the motives of a white artist taking generous close-up of racist artifacts. Others wondered if such images were a needed reminder of a cruel historical truth or a new act of degradation. I wanted to show you some of his work in context as well. He works on magazine assignments as well as other commercial photo projects. And in this case, photographing his doll collection for the assignments blend perfectly with his aesthetic. Identical twins, brothers Doug and Mike Starn, began exploring photography and attended the School of Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They received their MFAs in 1985. They had worked collaboratively since they were age 13. Here you can see a portrait of them with one of their pieces on the wall in the background. In 1988, the Starn twins exhibited their work in major solo shows in New York, and their first survey exhibition traveled to museums in Chicago, San Francisco, Hartford, and Honolulu. Their photo-based mixed media works include unconventional materials such as plexiglass, wood, nails, and transparency film that allowed them to reinterpret images from art history and incorporate them within their own aesthetic. They said, "We're trying to show that photography isn't an image, it's a three-dimensional object. It can have the same kind of growth and limitations or non-limitations as the other arts. It doesn't have to be confined to a craft or simply the photographer's eye and then the skill of printing." The Starn brothers typically reinterpret traditional or famous images from art history and incorporate them into their unique style. Their works are often collaged with Scotch tape and even using push pins to hold everything together. A decidedly low-tech approach to creating works in a high-tech time period. They worked in a variety of ways to relax photography, whether it was the use of Scotch tape or push pins, or using multiple prints to create an image. These large-scale images of moths attracted to light are printed on very fine Japanese quality papers. Sometimes you can see through the paper a little bit. They're translucent in places. The scale of the works are impressive, but also turning the print into a precious object. I saw this piece in San Francisco, and the slide doesn't do it justice. For one, it's huge. It's 5 by 6 feet. And what you can see a little bit is it's printed on very fine paper, and you can see it's actually layered. So some of the paper is translucent. You can see through it. It's been treated with wax and varnishes. So parts of it, and you see a little bit more up here. It really does seem to have a three-dimensional character to the print when you see it in person. I wanted to show they've also translated their photographic work into public art pieces. Here you see a few of their works in the South Ferry Terminal subway station in New York City. Jeff Wall is a Canadian artist. He is a Master of Arts in Art History from the University of Columbia in 1970. He first produced his large-scale backlit photo transparencies in 1977. These large transparencies mounted on light boxes are his signature works. He conceived of the idea looking at backlit advertisements at bus stops. Here you can see an installation view of some of his images. Not only the scale of them's impressive, but the fact that you see them in a darkened room. Wall's work is cinematographic. Many of his pictures are complicated stage productions involving casts, sets, crews, and even digital post-production. They have been characterized as one-frame cinematic productions. Susan Sontag ended her book Regarding the Pain of Others with a long laudatory discussion of one of these pieces, Dead Troops Talk. You're seeing a reproduction of that here. Calling Wall's Goya-influenced depiction of a made-up event, quote, exemplary in its thoughtfulness and power. Indeed, his imagery often referenced the history of art and philosophical problems of representation. The photograph's composition often allude to historic artists as well. His photographic tableaux often take Vancouver's mixture of natural beauty, urban decay, and postmodernism and an industrial featurelessness as their backdrop. His images resemble candid photographs that represent implicit social tensions as well as divisions between people, culture, and the sexes. This stage photograph is a good example of that. Has the look and feel of a snapshot. But if you look at this brief instant of time, you have two sets of people walking down. This guy looking at the other person, pulling his friend along behind him. He seems to be snarling and flipping off the other guy, who's kind of looking a little aware of him, but not turning to look. That division, not only the gesture, but the division between the people, suggests social tensions. Some of them have an element of the decisive moment, although that decisive moment is a created decisive moment. Laurie Simmons has a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia from 1971. Tyler is Temple University's art school. Simmons' work mixes psychological, political, and conceptual approaches to art making, transforming photography's propensity to objectify people, especially women, into a critique of the medium itself. Simmons stages her photographs and films, constructing with paper dolls, finger puppets, ventriloquist dummies, and the like. She animates a dollhouse filled with nostalgia, colored by an adult's memories, longings, and regrets. She did a series of these women dolls traveling the world. She also created elaborate dollhouses within boxes, as you see here. She's received many awards. She was the Roy Lichtenstein Resident in the Visual Arts at the American Academy in Rome in 2005. She has fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowments for the Arts. She had a major exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2006, and she's participated in 2 Whitney Biennials in 1985 and 1991. From early photographs of dolls acting like humans to more recent explorations of humans who resemble dolls, artist Laurie Simmons has spent her career blurring the boundaries between reality and fancy. That was Deidre Herring, 2015, in Hyperallergenic. Zeke Berman has been making studio-based photographs since the late 1970s, when, while recording his sculptures, his intention turned away from the objects themselves, but to the images of them. The formal range of his work, his inventive use of materials such as string, clay, ice, water, is varied, original, and idiosyncratic. A New York native, Zeke Berman mastered his skill in sculpture and photography at the Philadelphia College of Art and graduated in 1973. Since this time, he has utilized found objects and ordinary materials to construct delicate, formal arrangements that sometimes mirror 17th century Dutch still life paintings. Like much of the work we've seen today, Berman's work is about illusion. Here you can see that he essentially painted with water a cube. It could be water, it could be Caro syrup. We don't really know, but it also references the illusion in space. The material we can see is on a flat space, but it appears three-dimensional. Berman has an interest in the evolution of visual cognition, the mysteries of optics, as well as finding an intersection between sculpture, photography, and drawing. Writing in the New Yorker magazine, Vince Aletti says, quote, Berman's meticulously constructed, cleverly confusing, eccentric photographs echo Cubist collage and anticipate digital manipulation. Using simple materials, he introduces Brock to Jasper Johns in a funhouse. Here he's referring to optics and even the camera obscura, light traveling in a straight line through an access point or through a lens. Gregory Crewdson was born in 1962 in Brooklyn, New York. He's a graduate of State University of New York Purchase and Yale University's graduate program, where he is now Director of Graduate Studies in Photography. He studied with photographers Jan Groover and Laurie Simmons. Simmons I just showed you, Jan Groover I could have showed you in this lecture. Gregory Crewdson is an American photographer best known for staging cinematic scenes of suburbia to dramatic effect. His surreal images often are melancholic, offering ambiguous narrative suggestions and blurring the boundaries between fiction and reality. Working with a large production team to scout and shoot images, his photographs have become increasingly complex as if they were for a motion picture production, including its painstaking preparation of elaborate sets, lighting, and cast. He has cited Steven Spielberg, Diane Arbus, and Edward Hopper as his influences. He stages these things in his studio. As I understand it, the entire room here is built into the studio. And he put plastic along the floor so he could flood it out. Crewdson's carefully staged photographs concentrate on a tension between domesticity, nature, and the unknown. He explores the iconic American suburban landscape along with nature revealing psychological anxieties, fears, and longings. Domestic settings are often shown on the edge of nature, threatening to disrupt its fragile balance. His scenes are often at the twilight hour, when both natural and artificial lights are present, suggesting a moment of metaphorsis. A retrospective of Crewdson's work, produced between 1985 and 2005, toured European museums from 2005 to 2008. It was accompanied by a fully illustrated book. His work traveled to galleries and museums across Europe, Scandinavia, Australia, and New Zealand in 2013, and had a major monograph of his work published that same year.